Hello, I'm Jillian. Thank you for joining me. This video is about a very special teacher and the moral dimensions of her practice. But first, I'd like to tell you a story. Kathy progressed slowly up the stairs from recess, cradling her left arm in her right, tears staining her cheeks. Bonnie accompanied her with an arm protectively around Kathy's shoulders and a face set with purpose. The two girls crossed the classroom threshold and walked the straight line to their teacher Terry's desk. Terry instantly judged that this was not to be downplayed. Tears were unusual for Kathy, and such determination unusual for Bonnie. Terry rose from her chair and approached them around the front of her desk, crouching to eye level with Kathy. Without looking at Bonnie, she addressed her. "Thank you, Bonnie. If you were not directly involved in this, you can go and sit at your desk now." Bonnie did, but reluctantly. Terry continued. "Tell me what happened, Kathy." "Noah hurt my arm," she replied. Noah had entered the room quietly, along with the rest of the class. "Noah, please join us," Terry requested. Noah took his time, moving in uncharacteristic slow motion for a 9-year-old boy. He retrieved the bookmark from his desk and returned it to its spot in the book. He closed the book and placed it inside his desk drawer. He stood and pushed in his chair. Then he sauntered toward Terry's desk from the back of the classroom, weaving through the desk groupings without ever looking up. All eyes in the room had followed these precise movements. Noting this, Terry reminded the class, "The rest of you can continue with your reading." Eyes dropped into the pages of various books. "So I'm going to hear what happened from each of you one at a time," Terry said, "and I want you to listen to each other as well. After we've heard both accounts, we'll talk." Terry listened without interruption as first Kathy, then Noah spoke. And although the other students kept their eyes in their books, the unusual stillness and silence of a room usually bustling with energy and sound was evidence that they were also intently listening. No pages turned. This didn't concern Terry. The situation was already public, and she had learned from past experience that their curiosity was rooted in care for each other, not simply being nosy. When Kathy and Noah had both finished, Terry said, "There are two sides to this story, two versions, so be careful what you say. Would either of you like to add anything now that you've heard the other version?" Kathy and Noah remained silent. "Well then, it seems to me that this is the result of a misunderstanding. Can we agree to that?" Kathy, still sniffling, was the first to nod. Noah agreed a little more reluctantly. Terry continued, "Kathy, you must learn the difference between helping someone and taking their ball. To just take the ball is disrespectful." "Noah, do you understand now why grabbing Kathy's arm was not right? That kind of a reaction is always inappropriate." Terry maintained eye contact with them for a few seconds of silence. Then she smiled, patted their shoulders, and sent them back to their seats to read with the others. That story is from my book. And like the other stories in the book, it leaves us feeling pretty satisfied. Intuitively, we know that something good and something right has taken place. I had the pleasure of spending an entire school year with Terry and these students, uncovering the moral and ethical layers of her practice. 7 specific practices emerged from my data: attending to one's own moral conduct and behavior, creating a classroom community, fostering relationships with each student, directly teaching moral values, facilitating discussions, disciplining with a goal of self-discipline, and finally, implementing service activities. And although I present these individually, they are quite integrated in practice. How many did you recognize from the story I told? I'm going to review each one ever so briefly before suggesting what this might mean for moral education in schools. And for more detailed descriptions and analysis, I refer you to the book. Terry consistently displayed a wide range of moral values relating to human welfare, well-being, and dignity. You might have noticed sensitivity, respect, and fairness in the story I read. When she judged that the incident was not to be downplayed, that was sensitivity. When she crouched to be at eye level with Kathy, that was respect. And Terry explained that to me, saying, I don't want them to think that this is me up here and this is you down here and you're not as important as me. And how she gave each child a turn to tell their versions of the incident and how she listened without interruption, that's fairness. Terry was intentional about her conduct and behavior, and she works to be the very best person she can be, whether interacting with administrators, custodians, other teachers, parents, students, and family pets, and whether in the classroom, elsewhere in the school, or on field trips. Being a good person is its own end. But she's also conscious of the influence her conduct and behavior may have on the students' conduct and behavior, a means to another end. In her words, everything that the adults do, the children see, so you might as well show them what you want them to see. In demonstrating conduct and behaviors that are right and good, Terry supports and lends credibility to the moral messages and lessons she imparts by other means, which I will discuss shortly. So I would argue, to a significant degree, the messenger is the message when it comes to moral education. Terry defines community in terms of moral values, particularly care and helpfulness. And she says, in the community, I want the students to care and to know how to take care of each other. I would like to see them being a good community where they're helping each other out and being observant about each other's needs. To build this kind of community, Terry nurtures relationships among the students by providing a variety of opportunities for them to work together in different groupings. She establishes the expectation that every student will be able to work with every other student by telling the students that a friend might not be the best working partner. But she doesn't just leave it there. She monitors their interactions to ensure the students are respectful, kind, patient, cooperative, and inclusive. And if they're not, she intervenes with direct messages on these and other moral values, as I'll illustrate when I talk about that theme. Importantly, Terry doesn't undermine these relationships that she works so hard to build among the students. She allows the class to overhear the discussion between Kathy, Noah, and herself, for example, with the assumption that they're concerned for Kathy and Noah because of their community connection. Terry also fosters community by sharing control of the classroom with the students and, more importantly, insisting that they share control with each other. She doesn't mind if the windows and doors are opened or closed, or if the fan or lights are on or off, or who hands out and who collects the texts, as long as the students figure it out amongst themselves, consider each other's needs, and what has to get done does get done. Once again, Terry doesn't undermine this empowerment and autonomy by assigning and controlling duties as with a duty wheel. She explains, not having assigned jobs does seem to reinforce in a more natural way that we are responsible for helping each other. Because if they do have jobs, what they tend to say is, it's not my job to do that, it's so-and-so's job. So here, it's everyone's job to help. Such a community, though, requires Terry to navigate values conflicts. She promotes care and concern among the students, but in doing so may compromise Kathy and Noah's privacy and dignity. And by not rotating duties, Terry may be compromising fairness and equality to promote helpfulness, responsibility, and collaboration. Generally, moral values underlying community are prioritized because she believes that a classroom community supports personal dignity, fairness, and other moral values in a more ubiquitous and sustainable way. Terry also nurtures her own relationships with students by regularly communicating with them and getting to know each child as an individual. She sits and chats with different groupings during lunch and rarely interacts with other teachers on the playground or at school-wide events, so she's accessible and can engage with students. In her words, The more that you allow them to talk about things and the more that you listen to where they're coming from, the more you understand about who they are. This is how Terry knew that tears were unusual for Kathy and such determination unusual for Bonnie. Terry also allows and encourages the students to know her. Because she is accessible, open, and honest, students learn that Terry has a lousy memory, that she will laugh at their antics, and that they can trust her to help them with their conflicts. The reciprocal nature of these relationships is what is key in this context of moral education, because it enables Terry to model relationship values and encourages the students to emulate her expressions of such values and to practice expressing them themselves in relationship with her. Terry delivered formal, pre-planned lessons on compassion, courage, cooperation, respect, and responsibility. But she also delivered informal, spontaneous, although equally direct messages on these and other moral values as they became relevant in the moment. For example, she said the following to a group of students during a group project that was not going so well. This is a group project. It's about learning how to get along, and you have to be respectful of each other to do that. But you also have to be responsible for what you're doing and saying. You all have an obligation to tell Zeth your objections clearly. And Zeth, you have to talk about all the ideas and listen. In that passage are direct messages about respect, responsibility, and cooperation. In another example, Terry was in the middle of a formal lesson on respect when a couple of boys were misbehaving. She stopped the lesson and she said, "I'm sorry, but I was talking right now. You are not being respectful of me or of your classmates." The irony of this example represents a major criticism of traditional character education, that students learn to talk about values but not behave accordingly. In Terry's practice, the values lessons serve to provide a foundation of shared knowledge and moral language and to signal that this is something to attend to. But it's the spontaneous messages that make the moral values relevant to the students' experiences so they can learn when and how to behave accordingly. Terry encourages a range of discussions among the students, recognizing that discussion may serve two moral education outcomes. They are a way of, and these are her words, developing students' moral judgment, moral reasoning, ability to process moral matters, and ability to identify moral issues. That's cognitive development. They also may help to habituate expressions of moral values. Respect, for example, when Terry said in the story, "I want you to listen to each other," and responsibility when she said, "There are two versions of this story, so be careful what you say." That's character education. Achieving these two outcomes is a result of Terry attending to both the content of the discussion and the conduct of students while in discussion. As facilitator of discussions, Terry is not always values neutral, as many recommend teachers to be. When a moral value is not being considered or upheld, Terry will express her opinion. As she says, "I can't leave it, otherwise I wouldn't be teaching them anything." This happened, for example, when the students were discussing a letter sent home to parents about a student in their grade who had lice. They were used to openness and understandably were speculating on who it might be. Referencing values of respect, empathy, and compassion, Terry explained why this information was not being shared. This example represents how Terry draws a line between openness in support of a class community and individual privacy and dignity. In our story, the situation between Noah and Kathy was already public. In this case, it was not, and making it so would not further the goals of community. For Terry, discipline is an educative process that helps students learn to make right and good choices and decisions regarding their own conduct and behaviors. It's rarely punitive, as Terry assumes the best motivation and accepts mistakes. This is evident in the story where neither Kathy nor Noah was given a consequence for inappropriate behavior, although both of them did behave inappropriately. Contrary again to much of the literature, Terry does not maintain a set of rules dictating behavioral expectations. She explains that rules are too narrow. What makes the rules right anyway are the values they represent. Students should do what is the right thing to do rather than rules that should be followed. The onus then is on the students to learn to apply pro-social and moral values broadly in their interactions with others. Terry's class was involved in several service activities throughout the year. I categorized them as action-oriented and learning-oriented. Action-oriented activities obligated students and their families to support particular charities or needs, providing opportunities for students to take responsibility and be helpful. Filling hampers for families in need is an example of this. Learning-oriented activities were not associated with charities, and students had no immediate responsibility to serve others. Rather, their goal is to increase students' awareness of social and moral issues locally and globally, to foster moral values such as empathy, courage, compassion, and justice, and to stimulate students' moral reasoning, problem-solving, and decision-making skills. Current events discussions on social justice issues are an example of this. Each individual activity neatly fell into one or the other category and didn't directly support the potential learning outcomes of the other. This didn't coincide with recommendations in the service learning literature. But in combination, when understood as a program, students were provided with a comprehensive experience which exposed them to moral and social issues related to the environment, poverty, disability, and human rights, and to different ways of serving, such as giving time, items, and money, and promoting or advocating for a particular cause. These 7 teaching practices are not new to the moral education literature. What is new is their empirical contextualization in a single teacher's practice, demonstration of the conscious, purposeful, and well-informed way in which Terry envisions, enacts, and reflects on them as an integral part of that practice, and the nuanced way in which these practices are enacted in the moment. To capture the extent of this, I adopted a 2-pronged definition of moral agency, the moral person and the moral educator, which was proposed by Elizabeth Campbell. And I united it with a framework of teaching morally and teaching morality proposed by Fenstermacher, Osgothorpe, and Sanger. The moral agent teacher is a moral person who teaches morally or in morally justifiable ways, and is also a moral educator who teaches students about morality. This expanded definition of moral agency aligns it more closely with moral education. And as moral education, it's independent of any singular theoretical or ethical orientation, yet able to embrace the assumptions, beliefs, and applied aspects of many of them, as I've illustrated with references to cognitive development theory, care ethics, and character education. It's also able to embrace teachers' professional experiences, pedagogies, instincts, folk wisdom, and personal moral understandings. So, I will leave you with the suggestion that moral education in schools and classrooms might more comprehensively be framed in this way as moral agency.